Board. Welcome to the January 25th Kubernetes SIG CLI bi-weekly meeting. I'm Sean Sullivan. I'll be your host today, and I will jump directly into the announcements, which will keep us on track for the upcoming 127 release. We have the enhancement freeze, which is in slightly more than 2 weeks on February 9th. And after that, about a month later is when we're going to be freezing the code, and the release is scheduled for April 11th. Does anybody else have any other announcements that they would like to share? Okay, well, this is the segment of our meeting where we get to meet our new colleagues. If you would like to, this is completely voluntary, but if you haven't been here before, or if it's been a long time, this is your opportunity to introduce yourself. Would anybody like to introduce themselves?
I would. So, hi, my name's Nathan. I'm an SRE and a Golang developer at Argyle. It's a fintech out in New York, and this is my first time joining. I'm really happy to be here.
Welcome, Nathan. Is there anyone else who would like to introduce themselves? If not, we could move on to the next section, which is where we're going to do some updates on the KEPs and the sub-projects.
All right, real quick, Sean, does anyone know what this Paolo's Otter AI thing is? Looks like another one of those meeting recorders. Are you a real person? Otherwise, I'm going to remove you. You can drop in chat if you are. Thank you.
Thanks, Eddie. Okay. Katrina, would you like to give an update on the apply set, KEP?
Yeah, I just wanted to remind everyone that KEP is up for feedback. If you follow the link that I put in the doc in particular, there is now a more detailed section on the proposed reference implementation and queue control, which I think would be of particular interest to this group. And because there is not that much time left before enhancement freeze, a PRR review, I think, is the end of next week. And then, as you said earlier, Sean, the freeze is February 9th. Justin, I would really like to get as much feedback as possible on that right now so that we can get it merged. If we could get it merged this week, that would be ideal, even if it's provisional, and then we can put it up for PRR and move to implementable soon. Because so far we have feedback from Mache, which is really great, but we would love for anyone who was intending but had not had a chance to look yet to please leave your comments.
I'll leave feedback by the end of the week. Thanks for reminding me.
Thanks.
Is there any sub-projects which would like to give any updates? So if not, we can move to the open discussion. Katrina, would you like to talk about the last minute proposals for SIG CLI maintainer track topics?
Yeah, so as we were just talking about in the open chat, we are preparing our submission for the maintainer track talk for SIG CLI. We brought this up a few meetings ago, I believe, where because this is a session that is for the community, we would like to talk about what you're interested in. So if you have any ideas about what you would like to hear about that SIG is working on, or just topics that you think that would be interesting for us to cover, please let us know in Slack, and we'll consider that for a proposal. Otherwise, we have like a default that we use where we sort of use this as an opportunity to update folks on what the SIG has been up to since the previous KubeCon, and talk about any caps in flight, that sort of thing, and then use the remaining time for discussion. So that's what we'll do by default. But if you have topic requests, please get them to us soon, because we will be submitting that this week. Also, feel free to speak them up right now as well. You don't have to do it. It's like, if you have an idea right away, we can talk about it.
Okay, well, you've also got the potential PR backports. Would you like to talk about those?
I have the whole agenda today. Sorry for all the talking. Yeah, these are PRs that I saw going through my backlog of things I was tagged on, but other reviewers kindly actually did the approval for. And I was wondering if we should consider these 2 PRs for backport, given the content that was in there. So I wanted to bring that to the attention of the SIG. I haven't seen us do that many backports, so I'm not super confident that on the criteria that we use. So would it be possible to take a look together, since we have a lot of time in the meeting?
Sure. I think from my perspective, a lot of the backports we've done are on bug fixes that were broken in previous releases that we wanted to fix.
Right, for sure. And these are both bug fixes.
Okay.
So I don't know, could you open them up
Sure.
in the
Sure.
presentation?
Should we get into the files themselves?
I think maybe even the description would be helpful enough. I guess we probably consider how big the changes are in deciding whether or not to backport. But the first step would be like, is this even something that conceptually we think qualifies?
Okay, I thought I had opened them up, but I think that we're still looking at the notes. Let me see if I could bring this up, share this tab instead. There we go. Is that visible now?
Yes. So what I understood from this PR is that we have a piece in our code where we're using the autoscaling v2 beta 2 as our the main thing that we tried to get autoscaling data from. And it has a very old fallback on autoscaling v1, but there's a note in the code that these are not fully compatible. So we do try to get, we do try the newer version first, and then we fall back on the old. And if I understand correctly, in the 126 release, the autoscaling v2 beta 2 endpoint was removed. So that would never ever work against a 126 cluster, and we would be using the fallback to v1. So that would lead to a potentially weird sequence where if you're always saying using the kube control version like that matches your server version, in 125 you would be using v2 beta 2, in 126 you would be using v1, and in 127 you would be using v2, because that default version that we had in 126 was not actually valid for 126. So where we would backport that, I would think, is to 126 specifically. Did that explanation make sense?
Yep.
Yes, and I confirm from 126 release notes that it definitely was removed. So yeah, I'm +1 on backporting that.
Agree.
Okay.
And then the
can we see the
second
other
one, I would say just definitely yes for the second one. That seems like a total miss.
Yeah, it seemed like a very bad bug on the second one. But there was some discussion on the PR about how it could be tested. And I'm wondering if we're going to consider it for backport, if we should revisit that and see if we can get a better test in there.
Yeah, if we're backporting, I'd be big +1 on test. What is this?
So when we do the cherry picks, there's a script that will create the cherry pick PR, onto the previous releases. And so we'd have to add that if the test doesn't exist now, we'd have to add it so that it could be pulled in using that script, right?
Yes. Yeah, we'd have to add it to main, and then we could backport
Yeah.
both of them.
Like we'd have to backport both separately because of how the script works. Is that what you're saying?
I think that the script would backport the one, and then we can always do a pick or a rebase of the one commit onto the backport branch. I think. I'm sure Adolfo will have thoughts, but yes, we can definitely do that. Have you done a backport before, Katrina?
Yeah, but it's been a long time. And
Okay.
I remember being straightforward with the script for the particular thing that I had to backport.
Yeah, I pasted a command from my history in here, but can help if we need to.
Yeah. Is there anyone who'd be excited to try doing a backport? I wasn't actually even the approver on these PRs. There's just ones that I saw, so I'm not stuck on being the one to actually do it. Somebody's interested in trying the process.
I can try.
Okay. And just ping us on it.
Sounds good.
Do we have a link to the docs for that? I'll try to get that to you.
So who just volunteered? Just so I'll put that in the notes.
Me, Nathan.
Okay, I found the doc. I'll put it in the chat. I guess the remaining question is, so if for the first one, we're going to backport just to 126 because that's the only one we really need to. But for this one, do we need to figure out how long diff has a supported prune and go all the way back through all supported versions?
Probably
So,
not. Go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, I think that there's only a few. There's going to be maybe up to 3 previous releases that the release team will even maintaining and creating new versions of. So it probably wouldn't go back more than 3 versions.
For sure.
Does that sound?
I'm just wondering if like this feature itself goes back that many versions. So we would need to figure out when it was introduced.
Yes, probably.
It does. Okay.
I think this problem. I added dash prune for diff, and as far as I recall, this problem exists in day 0. Yeah. I just forgot to add label selectors.
Okay. So we should backport this one through all supported versions then. Okay. Thanks for volunteering, Nathan. Brian, you look unmuted, but I can't hear you.
How about now? Okay. I was Zoom does that to me every time. So that would be versions 26, 25, and 24. That when we say all supported versions.
That I think so.
So if we look on the Kubernetes release branch, we'll see recently the versions that have come out. I think there might have been something on 123, to be honest.
The releases page does say 24, 25, 26 though, so.
Okay, so back to 24 then.
So one of these goes to all three of those, and then the other one just goes back to 26, right?
That's what I'm thinking, yeah.
Yep. Okay.
So actually, I think we could get it into 123 as well. It says the end of life for 123 is not until the end of February. And they did do a release on the 18th, just a couple days ago. I'll add 23 with a question mark.
That's getting long enough ago that I want to confirm when the feature would end.
And it sounds like we want tests for this, but if we don't have them, it won't block the cherry pick, or will it? Are we thinking that the tests need to be in the cherry pick or not?
I mean, ideally, I think we would have the test in the cherry pick, yes. So that would mean we would need somebody to write the test first, and then before we can proceed with that, and Nathan could start off with the first PR, the 114.886, because that's one's ready to go. Arda, I think you both wrote the original code and reviewed that PR. Would you be willing to look into the test?
Yes, yeah, I can add test. Sure. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm seeing the PR going into the 124 milestone. Check out the PR here. The new prune parameter to the diff command. At the end of the PR there, the robot after merge added it to the 124 milestone. That would mean we need fewer cherry picks if that's the case. Well, it would mean that we don't need to consider 123, even if it is possible. So 124, 125, 126. Okay. I think we're all set on that then. Arda, if you can ping me and also Nathan on the test PR so that Nathan knows when that's ready to go, as well as your regular reviewers. I think that's all for those two topics then. Anyone have any other topics?
I mean, it's not my topic, but there was an issue that came up in Slack, and it ended up getting created as an issue where somebody wanted to be able to set custom headers on kubectl requests. I guess how they set them was yet to be determined, whether that's like through environment variables or flags or something like that. Oh, thanks, Sean. I didn't know, I didn't have a reference to it handy. So I don't know if it's, I mean, I was going to bring it up at the next bug scrub, but if anybody has any thoughts on that, or maybe just take a look at that. Thought it was kind of interesting.
Yeah, initially I thought it actually sounded like it made a lot of sense. And we're already adding custom headers or extra headers for the kube control command itself. But the use case that he mentioned actually made sense, which was he needed extra headers for a proxy. And if you could, he was wondering if you could add them on the command line itself.
I see that that sounds like something that would need to be added on every single command invocation then in the cases where it's useful.
Well, and I think, I can't remember if I raised the question, maybe in Slack, I raised the question of, is this really like a kubeconfig thing? Do you want it to, because do you want it to be tied to what cluster you're talking to? So if I'm talking to this cluster, I want these headers, or this cluster, I want these other headers. And so it sounds to me like that's really what they want. But I think the initial thought was to have it as a flag, but I don't think that probably doesn't make sense to be a flag.
Yeah, if it's specific to the cluster, that's a really great point. That does sound very kubeconfig. Aha, yes. They've said as much.
So should this be added to the RC, or at least should we? Well, what do you think, Eddie, about the kubeconfig RC file and whether or not adding custom headers makes sense?
Eddie had to drop.
Oh, okay.
I think it's would be, seems like a good use case. I can do another, what do you call it, PR for the enhancement.
I guess my question there would be, is this a user-based configuration that they need, or is it truly cluster-based? In which case, like every user communicating with that cluster will need this parameter. Because kubeRC is for user config,
Right.
and kubeconfig itself would be for the cluster config.
So the use case that they listed was best practice to lock down the K8s API via the networking layer. I've never done something like that before, so I don't know exactly if there's like a user level header that would be getting passed, like essentially a user and a password header or something like that. But I could ask in the issue.
Would anybody be opposed if I put a triage accepted on this?
I think that sounds like a good idea.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe mention that we're still discussing how exactly flag versus kubeconfig versus kubeRC. That we support the feature, but not necessarily exactly as described.
Got it. I'll do that afterwards.
Thanks. Yeah, the first half of the description does sound like cluster-based, but then the second one is talking about user auth, which sounds user-based, so I'm not totally sure.
Yeah, I do kind of worry that it's going to end up being a bit of both, which will make it difficult.
Justin?
Even if it's user-based, that might go into like an exec authentication plugin, maybe? Like, would we put it there? So it might still be a kubeconfig option.
Right, because it's not a preference, it's just user
Part of the
cluster
exchange.
pairing.
Like,
yeah,
and if the,
that's
particularly
true.
if those values are dynamic, right? Like if they come from some authentication exchange.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, it's very, very likely that this is kubeconfig material.
Okay, I'll put triage accepted on that, and we could move forward on how that is going to be implemented. Is there anything else? We've got plenty of time. If not, we'll get some time back.
Just an idea, but if anyone on the call is interested in the apply set KEP, maybe after we end the recording, I would volunteer to hang back and answer any questions about that. Just so we can maybe take the opportunity to move it forward if anyone's ready to discuss. Would anybody be interested in that?
I would.
Great.
Okay, so if you don't want to contribute to that particular discussion, then I will say that you can leave. We're not kicking you out. This is if you'd like to hear about it, please join us. Should I continue? I'm going to continue with the recording on this, if that's okay.
Oh, sure.
Okay. So let me bring up the KEP.
Of course, the KEP itself is collapsed because the file is so long, so it's actually at the top there.
Okay.
It gets me every time I scroll past it too.
So the one thing I was hoping to share, and I think I've already shared this with Justin, I might have already shared it in the previous meeting, was a concern about the, so I think that this addresses one of the, probably the most important issue with Prune, which is just how error prone it is. So this I think will fix that problem really well. And it continues to use the label selector in order to create the set of previously applied objects. And I think that at least there are some cases where that might not have very good performance and might not scale well. So Justin, I think I've already brought this question to you. So here's the case that worries me is that, and I think it's a fairly common one, which is that when you're not pruning anything. So like you have 100 objects, you apply them, and then the next command is an apply prune, and you stored the GVKs to generate the set of previously applied objects, and it's going to be the set that you just applied. There's going to be no difference. There's going to be no prune, but you have to go and grab all of them to actually figure out that there is no prune, right? So the one thing that I thought with so I think that the inventory approach with the group and the kind and the namespace name, that metadata, as well as I think you need UID. I think that method would not need any additional reads, whereas this method is going to need extra reads, even if you're not pruning. Anyway, so that I understand that we've probably gone down this. I just wanted to make sure that I brought that particular case up so that we at least we know about it as going forward. We may end up having poor performance with very large sets. Did that make any sense? Justin,
Yeah.
Katrina?
Oh, Justin, go ahead.
Yeah, we had talked about this before, and I agree that there is a potential performance issue that we will have to do a query per group kind and possibly across some namespaces as well. So there will be more queries for pruning. I think that there is a trade-off here between something that a layer of plumbing that all the tooling can use, and is willing to adopt versus like optimizing for the most performance. And I think one of the nice, so this is I think very lightweight. Labels are very lightweight, so we hope everyone will be able to adopt it. And I think also that nothing stops that porcelain tooling from using an inventory, right? So it may well be that inventory is higher performance, and well, we expect our inventory to be higher performance, and your tooling, whatever it might be, can implement that. We're just saying if we put it into kubectl, first of all, if we put it into kubectl, that will mean that it is not as universal a plumbing layer. So it would hinder sort of adoption by other tools. That's the theory.
Okay. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that, so I mentioned it in another of the design docs before the cap, and I haven't placed it in the cap. I just want to make sure that we're aware of that. And it sounds like we are. I saw that you both had added a section on alternatives considered. So there was one other thing, just to be complete, in that alternatives considered, there's a mention of that there's this other, I think, kind of orthogonal functionality to determine whether or not there's overlap in these sets, right? Whether or not a particular object, when you apply, there could have been a separate object that is applying that same object, and the prune sets may overlap. But and that was being used to judge the inventory object approach, but I didn't see that as a goal, and so I'm not sure that that's completely consistent for looking at the inventory object approach. It's kind of dinging it for saying, well, you're going to do these extra reads for the inventory object approach if you're determining overlap, but that really isn't, it doesn't sound like that's going to be something we're implementing or in this prune. Is that correct or incorrect?
I think that it's not exactly how I intended the objection.
Okay.
It's more of a source of truth issue based on how the proposal is currently phrased. So the proposal is currently saying the source of truth for membership is the label on the object itself. So on the members. So your random deployment, whatever, all the member objects get the label saying I'm a member of this set. And anything beyond that, like the annotations that we're proposing for the parent, is sort of a denormalization of that information. Currently, we're just proposing that we only denormalize the group kinds, and then use that as an optimization. It would also be possible to have in the standard even that there's another annotation by this name where you do full GBKNN, and that can be used as an optimization optionally by the implementations. But the issue and the trade-off that the tool would be making in that case is if they trust the GBKNN listing in the parent, then they may leak objects, because it is perfectly possible. Like, we're not in a system where we control, like we don't have admission control on here or anything where we can actually control the whole system that affects us. So it's possible that somebody could very easily add the I'm a member of this set label, and that de facto makes that thing a member of the set. And it would mean that the denormalized set list in the parent would then be out of date, and that object would be incorrectly ignored by the tooling's operations. So to avoid that scenario, that's why we're proposing just using the label query. So like, say we had a full inventory, like the GBKNN in our parent, what we would propose to do for kube control at least initially until proven that it is not performed enough, is we'd actually go through that list and extract the GKs from the objects and do the queries anyway to make sure that we actually get the full set, because performance is an issue. We think performance is already going to be so much better, but correctness is like our #1 priority, and for kube control, and we think that this would let us get complete correctness. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's clearer. Okay, so just so I understand, the parent object is going to store the group kind group, and then it has to store the namespace as well in order to be able to issue the label query. And in addition, in each one of these objects is going to be, it obviously has to have the label in order to be found, but there may also be annotations which describe which particular set that it's a member of. Is that, no, let me look some more. I don't want to waste any time. Let me dig deeper into the CAP before I.
I'm happy to explain. Don't worry about it.
Okay,
like
go ahead.
we have extra time here today. We all were busy until 1, I think. So with the regular meeting, I certainly have plenty of time to explain. So right now, there's actually an open discussion that I just posted yesterday at night after having like an idea. So there's maybe 2 ideas out there on the KEP that we can talk about. But like written into the KEP right now, there's only the one label, and the label like is the name of the set. So when we do that query, we're saying like, we're looking for the members of the set. Membership is determined by that label. Therefore, we have all the information that we need. The like sort of idea that I had yesterday that actually kind of relates to your previous comment is like, how careful do we need to be about different sets, different parents claiming to own the same set name? So if like as a user, if we're not restricting users in their choice of set names, they might do something unideal, like say my app or something for the set name, which is super generic, and somebody might choose that same thing. And then we're going to end up in a situation where we have very much like 2 controllers fighting over the same object, where they each think they own the set, but the sets are completely different in reality. And so pruning would sort of thrash. And so like the point that I was bringing up in my comment is like, how worried do we need to be about that? One way, if we did want to worry about it, would be to lock down the value of the existing label that we're using and say like all tools have to use a value that is like serialized identity of the parent, something like that. But then we make it users saying like, oh, but that's not meaningful to me. And I look at my object and what the heck is this? Like, I don't know what that is. So a second option would be that we have 2 things in the standard. One is like the user-friendly label where they get to choose the name that they wanted. And the second one is very much like a controller ref that says like, it's like an ownership label. Mm-hmm. And that label would be like a strong reference to the specific Kubernetes object that the parent is. And we query on both probably, or maybe just actually, no, we probably query only on the one. And then the tool would like mandatorily have to check that the other one matches its value, like that it actually belongs to it, and throw an error if like, I found something that doesn't belong to me. What is this?
So it sounds like we're going to try to enforce that there can't be 2 labels for an object, right? So if like there were 2 separately labeled parent objects, one my app and one in my app 2, and an object happened to be applied by both of them and had 2 different labels, then you'd have the overlap.
Right. That is like a bad scenario for the current implementation, and our KEP currently, like as
Right.
it is, not my comment notwithstanding, currently says that is not supported to have one object managed by multiple sets.
Okay.
Do you know of a use case where that is?
No, I think that's just that sounded like it was. So in the CLI utils, there was an inventory policy, which tried to address this issue, which was, what do you do if we find out that somebody else had also applied this particular object, because we added an annotation saying, who was the owner. And if it turns out that, I've looked at this and it was applied by some other group or some other parent, there's an overlap, what do I do? Well, I could take ownership of it and kind of kick the other one out, or I could throw an error and say, this one didn't get pruned because it was owned by somebody else. So there was an attempt to address this particular issue, and actually there's an open source tool called Config Sync that ran into it multiple times, where actually I didn't. This is the particular extra functionality that causes an inventory object approach to not be as a better performer, because it forces the actual grabbing of the object from the cluster instead of looking only at what's in the inventory. So if you're going to do something like inventory policy was done in the CLI utils, you have to go grab the objects before you prune them. Whereas I think a pure inventory object approach would attempt to store all the metadata necessary to calculate the prune set without grabbing any objects from the cluster, which would be, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, this is giving me a thought here, actually. What if the standard itself was just the labels that you must put on the children and the label that you must put on the parent, and then the annotations that determine how you do the fetching? So the whether it's GBKNN or GBK, that's optional and up to the tool. And like, we can say what kubectl is going to do, and we can also change what kubectl does. But we could actually have that part not be a required part of the standard. What do you think, Justin?
I like that a lot. Yeah, and I think that it brings up, like, we are only talking about alpha here, right? And so there's an experimentation thing. We have to see how much of these things, like, all right, if we don't have the GBK annotation, like, how bad is the performance, right? Like, we think that annotation is what makes it, like, the performance acceptable, but maybe we're okay. Maybe if we do them in parallel and just do metadata headers, it actually is fine, right? Like, we sort of can experiment on these things. So I like the idea of breaking the musts out into things that we sort of are saying, the labels are the musts, and maybe we don't even need to define what they are. So I like that. We'll say what kubectl does, and that we're going to experiment and try things and get feedback from the community and users, and that's why we're doing it here. I mean, I think that sounds great to me.
I had one other quick question. Are we enforcing that the parent object is a particular kind, like config map?
That's also under active discussion, I would say.
Okay. So we found in the CLI utils that everybody wanted their own CRD and to use as a grouping object. And if I think we regretted kind of forcing it to be in a config map, and then when another particular user wanted it in their particular CRD, we ended up adding a lot of complexity in order to be able to handle that. Whereas if we, to the extent that we're able to store things in annotations, that works for every object. And I think that even going forward, if there were some kind of proof of concept on an inventory strategy, storing the inventory in the annotation, like, allows multiple types of objects to be used, and may help with your ongoing discussion right now.
Yeah, I guess what we're considering is, but probably definitely, like, one way or the other, broader than the the CLI utils initial decision that you talked about having not gone so well. Like we were talking about, like the most restrictive that we would go would be that we would say it had to be on config map, secret, and certain kinds of CRDs and or custom resources based on an annotation on CRD. That's like the most restrictive that's currently in the proposal. The alternative is that we could allow anything, because as you said, strictly speaking, that's possible. All types inherently support the fields that we need. So the trade-off there in my mind is whether or not we want to be able to attempt to list parents. Because if we allow the objects to be completely arbitrary, then yeah, we support everyone. We support people using extensions, APIs, and CRDs, and built-in kinds of arbitrary types. Someone says, I want to use namespace, I want to use, I don't know, some random other object, then they can do it. But finding those parents then becomes super expensive because we inherently have to do a full discovery crawl. Do you have any thoughts on that?
So we've never really considered anything other than, you always have the objects locally, right? Because you just applied them. You just applied something, and so it may be that adding an extra requirement that they be listable from the cluster may not. We've never run into that so far with this CLI utils. It's like everything was, we had to have them locally anyway in order to be able to apply them. This is the second step, which is the prune. Why wouldn't we already know what the inventory object was?
We're talking about a slightly different workflow, I think.
The parent object. Yeah, it sounds like it's a slightly different workflow, but like for us, it was, apply, then prune. We had to read objects in order to apply them. So we always knew without having to go to the cluster what the parent object was, because it had a label on it locally. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just to maybe clarify my question. We also know it based on the design, like in a given apply prune operation, we also know what the parent is. That's not a problem. It's
just an extra, it sounds like an extra requirement that you're adding. Like we also want to be able to efficiently grab all the parents or from the cluster without having to know them locally. Go
exactly.
ahead.
And that's my question for you. Do you see that as being a useful feature? Have you ever had anybody ask for that ability? Because if that is not useful, then that definitely could simplify some things for us.
I've never seen that. And the tools that, but we built them, so it's kind of a bias there, but we never saw that use case.
Does anyone on the call know if maybe familiar with the other tools in the ecosystem, like Helm or the Carvel suite? Did they have any commands like list all my charts deployed? Or I'm not super familiar with like all the different abstractions that they use, but does anyone know of a tool that has a like list all my installed things command?
I mean, we certainly assume that they do. I thought it was like, I'm just trying to find the actual commands. We definitely have them in GCP and Google Cloud in the UI, where you can like see what we call applications are delineated. They're workloads. I feel like we talked about the idea of what the functionality of the porcelain should be, and it seemed like it was a default, but yeah, I'm just trying to find the command.
The porcelain callout is interesting actually, because maybe that is like kubectl is not supposed to be attempting to be a porcelain implementation. So maybe that's a distinction here, where like a porcelain tool can have a stronger opinion about what it uses for its sets. And maybe that's actually like, if they say, for example, I only use this particular custom resource type for my parents, then for them, retrieving the list is absolutely trivial. And maybe we don't need an opinion about that. I don't know. I could be convinced either way. Yeah, that helm list command looks a little more scoped than what we would be talking about, but very similar for sure.
I meant and I think in cap it's cap ls is the command in cap, which is the Carvel one.
Thanks.
So I think both the toolings that we've most of the toolings that we've considered do have this notion of listing the packages that they've installed, and I think what we're saying is it would be nice to have some interoperability where we could see those apply sets, whatever tooling was used. But it is an additional feature that is not currently supported by kubectl apply, right, which doesn't have this notion.
Correct. And we could take the stance that it should because that's useful, or that it doesn't have to because that supports something. Or we could also take this in between stance, I guess, that we should because it's useful, but it doesn't need to be performant because we're not optimizing for this. They can wait a couple seconds if they really, really want that data. Anyone else have a strong opinion on that topic?
So just so we're clear, the cost of that is that we wouldn't allow all of the types of objects to be the parent objects. We would have to scope it down so that we could efficiently find all the parents.
Yes.
That's the trade-off. Okay.
And by scoping it down, you're asking for like an additional sort of installation step, if you will, on the part of, like, say you're the person who's going to use a custom resource for your parent. You then have to get somebody with the permissions to modify the CRD to go and annotate it to say this is allowed to be a parent, which might not be you. So that's another piece of it.
Yeah, I'd also say it's probably not the worst idea to have, like, we can always expand the list later. It's probably not the worst idea to say, hey, you should be using a config map here, or hey, you should probably be using a secret here, and then let people come back in the alpha and say, oh, I have this use case for using a namespace as the owner. Great. Okay, then we can like talk about that, understand the use case, and like grow the list. And I think being more prescriptive is likely better. I think the list we have, I think, is pretty minimal. I don't know whether we could get away with config maps, with one of config maps or secrets. I felt like one tool of the tools we inventoried or we listed did config maps, and the other one did secrets, which is why we have both, but I don't know. I don't recall.
I could see a lot of like config sync wanted their own specific resource group CRD that was already being used as a grouping object.
Yeah, and that seems fine, right? The CRD and the annotation on the CRD should be pretty fast. As Katrina pointed out, though, there's no way to do that for built-ins, or that we know of, no way to do that for built-ins.
And I guess it ends up just seeming kind of arbitrary, and we're like, anything that you install is fine, but any of the things that came out of the box are not fine. I don't know if that, I don't know. I do like the idea of being limited in general. I could see namespace being interesting. Incidentally, you said namespace, and like, because a lot of people operate like with targeting the entire scope of a namespace for a set, maybe that is a natural fit.
KOps put annotations on the kube system namespace for cluster scope things. I don't think that was the best design decision, so I'm not going to be asking for that, but I feel like that's the sort of discussion we can have, right? Like, if people have these use cases, we can be like, is that a good idea?
Yeah, we at least have one like object can only be a parent, like one parent. You can't have one object being many parents. So I think we are already preventing some of that pattern by design.
Well, I think we're coming towards the end of the hour. I thought this was really useful, so I appreciate you both taking time to explain things and to have this discussion. It was, yeah, at least for me, very enlightening. Thanks.
Thanks. Thanks for taking the time and giving us the rest of the meeting time for this. We're excited about this CAP. I'm really hoping to get it into 127. So if everyone could provide their remaining feedback on the CAP so we can get it in, I would really, really appreciate it.
I'll do that by the end of the week. If does that work? If I get it in by Friday?
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thanks, everybody.